Welcome back. I would like to continue our discussion of deep ecology with a focus on the teachings and work of Thich Nhat Hanh. He fills in the gap on specifics which is left out by Arne Næss and Ken Wilber. So I'll be talking about the way he teaches about the 5 mindfulness trainings, and these are present in your class notes. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh modernizes the Buddha's 5 mindfulness trainings, and he does this as an antidote to the contemporary crises and devastation that we've created through our ignorance and neglect. He addresses the deep malaise in society, and he states that some preventive medicine is necessary to take care of ourselves so that we can become whole and regain our health and balance. And in his view, the ethics and the wisdom of the 5 mindfulness trainings provide the necessary medicine and the guidance to come home to what he calls our true nature, while at the same time we care for all of that which we interconnect with. So he proposes the 5 mindfulness trainings as a set of environmental ethics that at the same time are deeply personal. There's no separation between the personal and the global. He believes that the source of peace in the world is a peaceful mind, and he encourages people to transform the seeds of fear, anger, and hatred in their own hearts through meditation and mindfulness practice before trying to address social and environmental crises. This notion of building inner spiritual strength through meditation and mindfulness practice is crucial to his mind. In his journals between 1962 and 1966, at the height of the Vietnam War, this is what he wrote. Life waits patiently for true heroes. It is dangerous when those aspiring to be heroes cannot wait until they find themselves. When aspiring heroes have not found themselves, they are tempted to borrow the world's weapons, money, fame, and power, to fight their battles. These weapons cannot protect the inner life of the hero. False heroes find it easier to make war than deal with the emptiness in their own souls. Thich also observed of Gandhi that it was the Indian leader's deep spiritual strength that made the non-violent campaign for India's liberation a success. And without Gandhi's inner strength, which was cultivated through meditation and mindfulness practice, the campaign to liberate India from colonialism would not have succeeded. So he gives a clarity to this priority of developing inner spiritual strength. But despite this, he's been criticized by a number of activists for being overly simplistic. But Thich Nhat Hanh sees clearly the importance of social and political action. The Buddhism he teaches is an engaged Buddhism, engaged with the surrounding society and the environment. And he often says that if Buddhism is not so engaged, then it's not Buddhism. And he offers the 5 mindfulness trainings as a practice that any tradition, any culture, any religion can do. Because what he's trying to do is something a little bit bigger than being confined within a Buddhist frame. He seeks to place the action of global citizens within a consciousness so that that consciousness will work for the benefit of all sentient beings, the society and the environment. That's what he's undertaking, which is no small task. Thich Nhat Hanh frequently says, to be or not to be, that is not the question. Hamlet was obviously misguided. The question is to be aware of our interconnectedness, of our interbeing. To be aware of what is going on within ourselves and within our planetary systems. To become so aware of the nature of interconnectedness that we will know that if we refrain from doing this, then that will not happen. This refers to acting in an unethical and mindless manner that has no compassion or loving kindness in it. That refers to the devastation of human and planetary life. These are the variables he's playing with. And to prevent the possibility of devastation of human and planetary life, he offers the 5 mindfulness trainings of the Buddha as a guideline for living, and he maintains these are applicable to any culture or religious tradition. So we'll start with the first mindfulness training, and we have a friend from the class who's going to read this.
Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to the cultivating compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to condone any act of killing in the world, in my thinking and in my way of life.
Okay, thank you. Now the first sentence, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life. Aware means that I am mindful of suffering, and because of this I undertake this training. I'm aware that when life is destroyed mindlessly, then suffering ensues. Now the first mindfulness training specifically addresses suffering caused by physical violence, by wars and slaughterhouses. When we become aware of that, we take steps to diminish the source of the suffering. We can choose to be vegetarian. We do not give our approval to violence carried out by the state. But we have to take care of something that's much bigger than either of those. And that's of the violence that rests in our own minds. Because the different concerns that we have, they manifest in what we say, what we do, and what we think. So speech, body, and mind provide 3 locations for our action. Now, of these 3, mind is the most important and the most difficult one to deal with. So the task before us, as Thich Nhat presents it, is that we must learn ways of practicing non-violence in our minds. The second sentence is, I am committed to cultivating compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. Now this notion of learning ways indicates that we don't know it all. We're not perfect, that we make things, that we'll make mistakes. Yet we're making a commitment to always find ways to do things better because we choose to take responsibility for all that we interconnect to. Thich Nhat describes this first training as one of compassion, of cultivating the ability to remove suffering and then transform it. From the Buddha's Diamond Sutra, which was first presented over 2,600 years ago, we know that our compassion includes the ecosystem. To protect human life, we must protect the life of ecosystems. If the environment is destroyed, humans will be destroyed. This discourse on total interconnectedness by the Buddha was perhaps the first treatise on deep ecology. But it's taken much further in the stricture not to support killing even in our own minds. That's the big one. So Thich Nhat directs us and guides us to find the way to transform the wars and killing within our thoughts, to learn how to be internally peaceful. And if we are peace or environmental activists, and we haven't taken care of this, and we continue to be a peace and environmental activist out of anger or despair or reaction, then we will never succeed. The change and healing begins with the individual, and from there it can extend to society and the environment. Let me come on to the second mindfulness training. Crystal, would you read this, please?
Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to cultivating loving kindness and learning ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am committed to practicing generosity by sharing my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in real need. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. I will respect the property of others, but I will prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth.
Yeah, thank you. Now, in our commitment to cultivating loving kindness, Nhat Hanh is directing us to learn ways not to exploit. We have to learn to share and consume less. To celebrate the new millennium, the United Church in Canada initiated a cross-country campaign to encourage parishioners to participate in what was called a moral economy. And this campaign was totally consistent with the intention and direction of the second mindfulness training. Perhaps the most difficult thing to share is our time. I probably give you too much work to do, so you don't have enough time to share with others. But we'll often give money to support a worthy environmental cause. But rarely do we share time because we're so busy, or we think we're so busy. And we attribute not having time to causes and conditions that lie outside of ourselves in terms of job, family, schoolwork, political activities, and so on. But being polluted by time is a condition that lies within our minds. We forget to practice mindfulness. We forget to be aware of what we're doing. And rarely can we even enjoy something simple as a cup of tea. I remember with some nostalgia having tea with my Scottish grandmother. It was a very carefully observed ritual with the best china and attention to detail. And it was a great opportunity to simply slow down and for my grandmother and me to be with one another in a very full way. Now contrast this with what most of us do each morning. We have a hasty cup of coffee. We watch the news. If we have children, we feed the kids, then we hit the highway. So it's no wonder that by the time we get to work or our destination, we're tied up into tight knots. And this is caused by pollution by time. On those occasions when we allow ourselves to be present and truly share our time, there's often a different memory because it stands out from all other experiences of life. I remember quite a number of years ago shopping at Starbucks to buy some decaffeinated coffee. There was an elderly lady standing in front of me, and we were the only two customers in the Starbucks shop. And she was being served by the assistant manager, who was a very nice young man. And she was asking him about the taste and the quality of the different kinds of coffee beans. So the assistant manager told her about the differences between French roast, Kenyan, Colombian, Java coffee beans. And I was just listening to this and getting quite an education. And then he finally asked her, "Well, madam, what would you like?" And she says to him, "Do you have any of that Tim Hortons stuff?" And the young man smiled broadly and said, "Well, we don't stock that, but as we're not busy, I will take you to the nearest Tim Hortons and get some for you." And he got somebody else to serve me. And I've always remembered that because the assistant manager decided to share time and be fully present with this elderly lady. And I remember that with a lot of good feelings. And I think the manager probably does, and certainly the elderly lady. So this training, the second mindfulness training, is about generosity. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum from exploitation, oppression, social injustice, and stealing. All of these things are the opposite to generosity. They all have many faces, and it's a form of theft that kills us slowly, causing so much suffering. The lack of generosity in the world today, in interaction, causes incredible suffering. And in the second mindfulness training, Thich Nhat Hanh is placing the emphasis on loving kindness expressed through generosity. And he poses a direct question about the second mindfulness training. This is a question I'll put exactly to you. With respect to the second mindfulness training, is your nation practicing this? Or in the name of development or growth, is your nation or are your lawmakers violating it? exploiting other nations, trying to make them into a market, monopolizing them, and profiting from their manpower and natural resources. This is very direct. This isn't some sky-in-the-high spiritual statement. This is a direct question. This is what the second mindfulness training involves. What's around you? Take a good look. What's inside you? Take a good look. So the second mindfulness training is a very profound practice because it generates larger and more encompassing groups of people in communities, cities, and nations. And it's the essence of engaged Buddhism. And it's the essence of any engaged spirituality. And it fully answers Thich Nhat Hanh's critics about his lack of activism. I want to come on to the third mindfulness training. Wendy, would you read this, please?
Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivate responsibility and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without love and a long-term commitment. To preserve the happiness of myself and others, I am determined to respect my commitments and the commitments of others. I will do everything within my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families being broken by sexual misconduct.
Thank you. Now, this training is about sexual responsibility to heal the negative consequences of sexual misconduct. Now, in contemporary society, love is often misunderstood. Too often, attachment is substituted for friendship, the sex industry for relationship. And it's no surprise that subsequent actions lack responsibility. Genuine love calls for understanding, responsibility, and respect, whereby our sexuality reflects a wider mosaic of joyful communion between body and spirit. Now, the key term in the third mindfulness training is responsibility. Because we're responsible for the well-being of so many people that we connect to, we make the choice to refrain from sexual misconduct. Now, in sexual relationship, as many of us know and have experienced, we can become deeply hurt and devastated. So this training is designed to protect ourselves and others from being wounded. Loneliness, advertising, and the sex industry provide a very powerful inducement for misconduct, which in turn has very destructive consequences for all concerned when involving the sexual abuse of children. Now, on a daily basis, the imagery of the sex industry is presented to our senses through advertising, the media, internet pornography, and films. The producers of this material may claim freedom of expression, but I think it's simply a lack of responsibility. This material influences everybody very profoundly, particularly young people. And this irresponsible imagery pollutes our consciousness and fosters sexual misconduct. And this destroys self-respect and respect for the other. So we need to learn ways to protect our senses, to guard against the energy of the sex industry as it is insidiously pervaded to us on a daily basis, particularly with respect to the commodification of women. You can't sell a car unless there's a sexy woman half naked draped over the roof or over the bonnet. Thich Nhat Hanh says that we protect our senses when we meditate. We protect our senses when we draw on the mindfulness trainings for guidance. And at present, there seems to be an ethical void around sexual behavior, and young people are left to experiment without any clear guidance from parents or society. So young people stumble frequently into disaster and suffering, and so do their parents. This ethical void can be filled by the observance of something like the third mindfulness training. And mindfulness practice is the means to reestablish the balance that has been lost. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh is arguing about. So meditation closes the sensory doors to external inputs, and in the process, it opens the doors to the heart. And that's where our true nature of responsibility dwells. And once the doors to the heart are opened, we're predisposed to be more responsible with our sexuality. Because we have to realize that our consciousness is a vast territory. It is immense. Within our consciousness, we have patterns from the collective unconscious. We have patterns from our habits, our bad habits acquired through our conditioning. We have addictions from our ancestors. If you had a grandparent who is an alcoholic, those patterns are present in you. We have many life experiences which are damaging and harmful that we may have suppressed. We have all of that, but we also have all the patterns of an enlightened mind. We have the best of it, or we have the worst of it, but our consciousness contains all of it. So in this cosmic smorgasbord, which is our consciousness, there's so much that's contradictory. There's so much that's at odds. So if we didn't have ethical guidelines, if we didn't have something like the mindfulness trainings, we would suffer continually from confusion and conflict. And in a sense, that's what most people do. Most people are confused and conflicted because they have no ethical guidelines to follow. The guidelines come from teachers and masters like the Buddha, like Mother Teresa, people like this, who have suffered greatly, and from their experience and love for humanity, they offer insights so we can cultivate a different sense of consciousness. So the third mindfulness training of the Buddha is this kind of guideline. It helps us to know our own minds, to see our habits and our addictions for what they are, and guide us to become more aware. So this training waters those seeds. Now let me come on to the fourth mindfulness training.
Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and to relieve others of their suffering. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to learn to speak truthfully with words that inspire self-confidence, joy, and hope. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain and to not criticize or condemn things of which I am not sure. I will refrain from uttering words that can cause division or discord, or that can cause the family or the community to split apart. I will make every effort to reconcile all conflicts, however small.
Thank you. Now, if we learn to take care of our thoughts as the actions of our mind, then we are in a position to take care of what we say as the actions of our speech. Now, what Nhat Hanh is communicating to people who have been to his retreats or read his books is that in meditation we pay attention to and we discipline our thoughts, and then we take greater care of what we say. And in this way, the important guidelines of the fourth mindfulness training are respected. Because we have to think about where our speech comes from. All of us here probably had stuff come out of our mouths and we think, where on earth did that come from? We have to realize that our speech comes from the thinking of our parents, of our ancestors, teachers, and friends. We're a continuation of our ancestors and our teachers. And we have to be aware that in addition to all their positive qualities, we've also inherited patterns of speech that are harmful. And it often comes out when we least expect it. Because our parents communicated in a particular kind of way, we carry on with the same pattern. So we criticize our children and reprimand them at meal times, because that's what our parents did. So children consume the energy of punishment along with their meal. And very often they'll cut themselves off from their bodies while eating. So it's not surprising that so many children in our society suffer from eating disorders. Because mealtime is a battlefield that produces casualties. We all know this in one way or another. But that can be changed if parents would take the time and the effort to talk about what is going right with their kids. Water and encourage those aspects within each person that are positive. So meal times that are mindful and aware can transform family life. So we have to learn ways to be considerate in our speech. It takes time, understanding, and awareness. So this training is about the art of deep listening and the power of compassionate speaking. But in our modern world, very few people give their time or presence to listen deeply to anyone. When was the last time that anybody really listened to you? On the other side of the coin, when did you really listen to somebody else? Or when they're talking to you, have you got shopping lists, telephone calls, homework for this course running through your mind? What's missing? What's missing is our full presence. Because our presence is the greatest gift we can give anybody, especially children. Because our presence bridges huge chasms of misunderstanding and it heals wounds. And there's always misunderstanding between generations. And there's always wounds between generations. How can we heal this? How can we cross a bridge between generations? We learn how to be present and we learn how to deeply listen. Most of the time when we listen to somebody else, we're just listening to our own perceptions, our own judgments and assumptions about the other. And that's what we take away from the conversation. We haven't heard anything they've said. What we've done is to feed anything they may have said through our own perceptions, judgments and assumptions. And we distort what is presented to us. So to truly listen and to be present requires that we must find a way to drop our judgments so we can be present. That's what the stillness of meditation is for, according to Thich Nhat Hanh. In that state, we refrain from judging what is presented to us. We don't distort what is said. But without stillness, we will twist what we hear and we'll thread it around and through our own prejudices. And Thich Nhat Hanh says that because of that, we need to practice meditation. We need to learn how to be still. In this way, we are no longer trapped in our fears, our prejudices, and projections. Now, I think back to the times with my own children when they had really important things to say to me and I was too busy. I didn't stop to give them my full presence. I didn't really listen. And many years later, now that they're all grown up, and they don't ask me for money quite so often as when they were teenagers, I've made the point of saying to each one of them, I remember the time when you said such and such to me and I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry. And they look at me in total astonishment. You remember that, Dad? That's cool, man. This sort of thing. And it really touches them deeply, as it touches me also. But it's not just our children that we don't listen to. We don't listen to our partners, our colleagues, or our friends. So there are important aspects of deep listening that we're not very good at. We don't have the skill. So we need some kind of training to listen. Basic steps are needed. And in meditation, the silence of compassion allows you to listen more closely to your own heartbeat, to your own consciousness. Then you can start to listen to others. Now, the children responsible for the high school murders across North America, they had no one to listen to. No one would listen to them and find out just where were they at. There's nobody there to give them wisdom and guidance to take different steps throughout life. If we're insightful, and this is to the parents in the class and in the viewing audience, our presence is the greatest gift we can give to our children. Being present, listening deeply from a compassionate heart, speaking lovingly as a daily practice. This is how you transform family life. And this is what the fourth mindfulness training is all about. It's a very practical and ethical guideline about what to do with our speech, our listening, and our presence, so we can bring about transformation and healing. And never before have we had so many means to communicate with one another. Yet we remain largely isolated because our communication is shallow and meaningless. Often there's no depth to it. And so we need some kind of guidance. When we speak to people, our words and our energy have the power to lift them up or crash them down. Our first choice is usually to crash them down, so that we can get some sense of self-importance out of the interaction. And this all flies in the face of this particular training. What we usually do with our speech and with the quality of our presence is not very wise, because the environment that surrounds us encourages us to be untruthful. We're surrounded by a lying industry. So we lie ourselves. We might believe it's innocuous to lie under certain circumstances, the proverbial white lie, but some part of our mind knows that we've done so, that we've personally compromised ourselves. When we pump up that volume and we look at the behavior of politicians, business people, the media, bureaucrats, most people in these occupations feel they have to lie in order to be successful. This is the norm of their professional life, especially lawyers. Our elected representatives do not usually speak truthfully. Although we avidly read the newspapers, we know that our elected representatives are pulling one over us. They do not tell us the truth. Our elected representatives are aware of polls, public opinion polls, and the chances of their re-election. And the icons from the sports, entertainment, and media domains, they present a lot of posture, a lot of hype, rather than truth, and we know that most of them lie. So we have an environment surrounding us that encourages untruth, and this produces devastation in personal lives. That translates into a degraded nation, a degraded world, and a degraded environment. One profession that rarely tells the truth is the scientific profession, particularly in the area of environmental research. They're in the thrall of large corporations and governments, and they are paid to lie. That's a big burning question. When we're trying to be clear about what must be done on the environment, we find that what scientists can we trust? Whose word can we believe? Given that many scientists are paid to deliberately mislead the public. So Thich and Hanh asks us again a direct question. Can we not set an example for our children by speaking the truth? Something as simple as that. By coming from the heart. By demonstrating the positive effects of deep listening and compassionate speech. If we have a lying industry that surrounds us, we need an antidote. And an antidote such as the fourth mindfulness training is needed to transform the way we communicate with others. And I see this training as a sword to cut through the Gordian knot of lying that tangles us in webs of deceit and destruction. And we can begin by simply learning to listen deeply and to speak compassionately. Now I want to come on to the final mindfulness training, the fifth.
Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, for my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will ingest only items that preserve peace, well-being, and joy in my body, in my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family and society. I'm determined not to use alcohol or any other intoxicant, or to ingest food or other items that contain toxins, such as certain TV programs, magazines, books, films, and conversations. I am aware that to damage my body or my consciousness with these poisons is to betray my ancestors, my parents, my society, and future generations. I will work to transform violence, fear, anger, and confusion in myself and in society by practicing a diet for myself and for society. I understand that a proper diet is crucial for self-transformation and for the transformation of society.
Thank you. Why must we be so careful about what we feed our body and mind with? It's so that we don't get caught in our notions of body and mind. And here I'm going to fly in the face of modern conventions, because this is a very difficult point to grasp. Now, from the Buddha, we learn something. This body is not my body. It is my mother's body, my father's body, my children's body. Therefore, I must take very good care of it. This mind is not my mind. It is my children's mind, my student's mind. Therefore, I must take very good care of it. Now, this particular teaching provides us with a sense of body and mind which is beyond our bag of bones covered in skin. It's a sense of unlimited potential and also a sense of responsibility. I remember a startling interview several years ago on the TV program 60 Minutes. Barbara Walters was interviewing Christopher Reeves, star of the Superman movies. And he'd suffered severe spinal injuries when thrown from a horse during a show jumping competition. And he'd been left totally paralyzed. But his recovery process inspired millions with his fortitude and courage, and the new opportunities he saw for himself from his wheelchair. I think he starred in several movies from a wheelchair, which I think is quite fantastic. But at one point in the interview, Christopher Reeves was very quiet. Then he remarked to Barbara Walters that this accident had made him realize that he was not the body. This was not who he was. This was not his identity as a person. Because the body limited the sense of who he was and what he connected to. And he said this very quietly and with a very calm assurance. And for me at that moment, he was Superman, though not of the Hollywood genre. So contrary to modern conventions and attitudes that we can do whatever we like, this incredible sense of individualism we have, that we can do whatever we like with our mind and with our body. This training is very specific. The fifth mindfulness training is moving us in the opposite direction. Because what it's saying is this, is that my body and my mind are not individual entities that I can do anything I like with, such as filling them with drugs, alcohol, filling my mind with hateful attitudes, with harmful identities, or filling it full of unhealthy foods, cravings, and violence. If we have a sense, a bigger sense of our body and our mind, we have a sense of responsibility and interconnectedness. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh is getting at with this fifth mindfulness training. And it's a very difficult idea that my body and my mind exist for future generations. Therefore, I must be careful and aware of what I put into my mind and my body. My responsibility to students such as you is that I do not spew hate literature. I do not abuse my mind with neo-Nazi hate literature and talk to you about that. I talk to you about things that I think will refine your consciousness, that will give your mind something to grab hold of and think about. Now, this is a very difficult idea, but it's very important. If we want to change our consciousness and the environment of planet Earth, we have to realize that our body and our minds do not belong solely to us. We leave a legacy for future generations. Now, not only must we monitor our own bodily and mental consumption, we have to exercise care and responsibility over what we allow into the minds and bodies of our children in order to prevent murders from happening in our schools. Here I'm going to talk about taking the fifth, but I'm not referring to the American Constitution. I'm referring to the fifth mindfulness training that Zach read to you. Then look at its implications for the environment of high school violence. Now, you may all remember the shockwaves from the 1999 high school shootings in Littleton, Colorado, and Taber, Alberta. This swept across North America and it touched every community. Those shock waves have receded. And the greatest danger now is that the public may distance itself from taking responsibility for the toxic environments all of us have allowed to be created. Students across North America, however, have not forgotten. On the anniversary of the shootings at Columbine, many students across America refused to go to school for fear of a repeat shooting spree. We also had a repeat knifing spree at a school in Orleans, here in Ottawa. Personally, I was shocked at the specter of children shooting children in high schools. I was very deeply shocked. After several days of silence and meditation, I wrote a short essay which is titled, "Yes, It Can Happen Here." This has been posted on the course newsgroup on the internet, and I would encourage you to access that on the internet. What I did in this essay was to look deeply into the causes of the shootings, and with the likelihood that with the passage of time, people would become removed from any sense of personal responsibility. And I also suggested the mindfulness trainings as an ethical guide for young people. So I began this essay by writing about the ready availability of guns and drugs. Also the lack of time spent with young people by parents, teachers, and community leaders. And many of our children have become exiles. They experience not love. They experience not connected. Nobody hears their voice. And we've largely forgotten how to listen to them. So many children have found a third parent in cyberspace, where violence, hatred, and killing are readily available without any sense of consequence, without any sense of responsibility. So in the absence of clear ethical guidelines from parents and from society, young people are creating their own identity from the very worst that cyberspace and Hollywood have to offer. It's an unreal world full of violence with no sense of consequence. To many young people, this is the reality where they satisfy their search for identity. In the absence of a stable identity, there's a drive to achieve instant fame through acts of notoriety, following the scripts of cyberspace and movie violence. Children who have received core ethical values through parents, teachers, and community leaders have some kind of internal strength to resist this seduction. But the exposure affects every child in North America. But the children who've fallen through the ethical cracks, who have no guidance, they live out their sense of exile through the very cruel and violent fantasies that cyberspace offers. And in the process, they become desensitized to the consequences of violence. I would say that most young people, their parents, and society as a whole are unaware of the need to guard our sensory doorways or to eliminate the engagement with violence in our consciousness. Now, the doorways provided by our senses, our eyes, our ears, our mind, and so on, expose us to so much damaging consumption. The high school murders are not a teenage problem. Many commentators started to write about what's wrong with teenagers. There's nothing wrong with teenagers. This is not a teenage problem. This is a societal problem. So a societal solution is necessary, one that deals with anger, frustration, and hatred, not just amongst teens, but amongst their parents and their grandparents. So we need an alternative, a different methodology which impacts the internal environment of violence that's present in our society and transforms it. Now, the mindfulness trainings I'm outlining for you today can help, I do believe, can help to mend this ethical void. And this is the position of Thich Nhat Hanh. And I think there are so many mentally disturbed young people because there are so many mentally disturbed adults who are their role models. Neither group knows how to protect themselves from from ingesting the toxins and violence that pours through their senses. If we don't guard our sensory doorways, we'll get sick. Now, after the political and media platitudes subsided following the high school murders, we have to be realistic. Not much is going to change in terms of institutional structures. Politicians will make their statements. Journalists and lawyers will make their statements, but not much will change. Therefore, it's necessary to provide young people with the skills and the strong energies of mindfulness to take care of the energies of hatred and violence, which are provided through parental neglect and the societal approval of violence. Now, the change I suggested in the essay, Yes, It Can Happen Here, is mindfulness practice. There are parents and teachers everywhere who are desperate for a change of direction and who know that we're all caught up in the middle of an enormous crisis. The Chinese letter for crisis has two characters to it. The first character is that of danger. The second character is that of opportunity. We need to recognize the danger of anger and frustration and hatred. And we have to seize the opportunity of mindfulness practice to deal with it. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh is talking about, specifically with respect to the fifth mindfulness training. Because in the space created by meditation and mindfulness practice, the toxic and violent consumption of everyday life has got no doorways to pass through. So in this essay, I recommend two meditations that young people can do in order to take care of their distress, their anger, and their frustration. And as I said before, this is posted on the course news group on the internet. One meditation was a walking meditation. The other was a meditation with internal tones. I also invited meditation teachers to take their skills into schools and community centers and perhaps leave their cushions behind and provide methods that can impact the ecology of anger and hatred that our society has created. I invited young people to bring such teachers into their midst just to see what they could teach. And I reminded everyone that we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. There really is nothing in between. And it is our actions from a space of clarity, once we take care of our consciousness, that can provide solutions. When we remain indifferent to the dangerous environment we've created, then we perpetuate the problem. So I asked everyone to choose wisely and immediately. In this essay, I made the point that as we calm and take care of our distress in meditation, our body and mind have the capacity to heal us and release the cause of the distress when we do something like walking meditation. In walking meditation, we literally walk ourselves out of crisis by acknowledging the distress, taking care of it, and releasing the energy of it into the ground. It's very simple. We also find the clarity to know what to do or say in situations of crisis. And I use this to good effect with a teenage son who was deeply mired in the drug world of Glasgow. And this was a hell that I entered. I knew nothing about this reality. And I really didn't know what to do, and I struggled to find the best response at the time. I drew on the silence of meditation to keep myself steady. This way I could stay clear of judgment and discrimination by creating a space of deep silence through a lot of walking meditation. I must have covered many, many miles of walking meditation just to keep myself calm and steady. From that space, there was clarity about what I would say and what I would do. Now, if I hadn't been taught what to do about anger and distress, I could have easily set in motion a chain reaction of anger and suffering by being a reactive and judgmental parent. Now, this essay on mindfulness practice was sent far and wide thanks to internet technology and to good people everywhere who then put it through their networks. It was used to good effect in many schools and communities, particularly Colorado, and also in my own community, Ottawa. Now, this fifth mindfulness training is about the way we consume. It guides us to adopt new patterns of consumption so that our society changes because it's becoming aware. Now, we consume much more than edible food, though what we mostly eat is not very good for our state of health or mind. And the same applies to the rest of our consumption. Bombarding our senses with violence from the media, television, and advertising, along with the consumption that our desires and cravings drive us to, none of this is good for our physical and mental health. Our consciousness absorbs and is defined by all that we consume. So if we continually consume toxins, garbage, and violence, then it shouldn't surprise any of us what drives us in our daily lives and decision-making. We're the sum of the nutriments we put into our mind and into our body. And if we don't learn how to protect ourselves from ingesting toxins in our food and through our senses, we'll get sick and violent, and we'll create a sick and violent society. What Thich Nhat says about this is that mindfulness is our protector. And he offers the mindfulness trainings as an ethical set of guidelines. And he says that we must use them to prevent the consumption of violence and toxins through the 6 sensory doorways. If we're aware, we can distinguish that which is good for our organism and that which depletes it of energy. We can say, this is not good for me, or this is not good for my children, and then begin cultivating an alternative consumption that is good. Now, without mindfulness practice, we're exposed to all kinds of energy-sucking elements that activate the seeds of violence, hatred and anger and despair that lie within us. And this drains us of energy and life force. As we begin to understand the effects of all these energies that pour through our senses constantly, and they feed our worst attributes of mind, they bring out the darkest, blackest parts of ourselves. If we understand that, we can stop. We can place ourselves in a meditative state and with insight cut off the energies that are damaging us. We then make a choice to cultivate the sense impression foods that nourish us in a positive and wholesome way. And the mindfulness trainings are there, according to Thich Nhat Hanh, to provide the guidelines. We have to realize that our mindless consumption and our greed fuels a global economic system that threatens the world's resources and pollutes the environment. And we're encouraged to consume in this way by a political economic system based on greed. As long as we remain willing prisoners to this corporate and media ecology, we cannot take responsibility for the world we live in and create. The 5th mindfulness training, designed by Thich Nhat Hanh, is to guide us out of this prison with a clear commitment to consume mindfully and in the process create a different kind of society, one that is responsible to ancestors and future generations. And the issue of responsibility is the key to this training. Because we interconnect with and affect everything, we have to realize that lack of responsibility to the environment, to our ancestors, to future generations, creates a very dangerous situation. We need to go on a diet. And this is a diet of mindfulness for all aspects of our life, society, and environment. Because it's self-evident that the life support systems on the planet that maintain our life are severely threatened by the accelerating greed, materialism, and waste of the current global paradigm. Our ignorance and neglect is destroying the niche we occupy on planet Earth because we don't know how to behave. We don't know how to behave with awareness. First of all, with respect to ourselves. We don't take good care of ourselves. And if we don't do that, we then cannot take good care of other people or of the planet. So unless we create a drastic shift in consciousness, there's no possibility of peace and balance. environmentally or socially. This is the argument that Thich Nhat Hanh is giving us. And he's saying that the 5 mindfulness trainings and their practice, this provides the necessary shift in consciousness. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh goes even further. He says that he doesn't see a way out for our modern civilization other than practicing the 5 mindfulness trainings, or something like that. And the trainings are not a coercive design for conformity, they simply assist us to be more aware of what is going on around and within us. And the energy to practice them is that of compassion and understanding, not of fear and anger. Thich Nhat Hanh refers to their practice as the medicine for our times, as the hope for the future. They're designed to provide protection. And what he says eventually is that if there is this, the 5 mindfulness trainings, then there is that, a balanced and peaceful world.